Hi there folks, it's book review time, and today I am going to be reviewing Shadowplay by Joseph O'Connor. And Tilly is very busy at the moment with a chew, so excuse the little gnawing sounds down by my side here. She's happily in her basket. I'm sure she'll come and say hello later. So, Shadowplay. Now, I leapt on this book, and in fact, this was a Christmas present from my sister-in-law. She knew that this would be right up my street, and I couldn't really wait to read it, so I started it last month, and I've just finished reading it. Shadowplay basically follows the life of Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, from his young adulthood in Dublin, where he worked part-time as a theatre critic for a while, through to his being employed as the manager of the Lyceum Theatre by the great actor Henry Irving, who had just taken over that theatre. And it follows his life, his very, very volatile and edgy relationship with Henry Irving, and also their relationship with the great actress Ellen Terry. And although his relationship with Henry Irving was, according to Joseph O'Connor, extremely edgy and stormy at times, their relationship was also a very, very close one. I have really enjoyed this book. Now, of course, people who know me will know this is right up my street because I love Dracula and I have a very strong theatrical background, and I love theatre history too. So you can see why my sister-in-law bought me this book, and she had just read it and said it was fabulous, and it really is. I so enjoyed this. The writing is brilliant. Joseph O'Connor's prose is really beautiful. His descriptions are wonderful. Early on, there's a description of Bram Stoker and Henry Irving in later life, travelling by train. I just want to read you this just to give you an idea of what the prose is like. A blood-stained scarlet sky streaked with finger smears of black and handfuls of hard-flung gold. Then a watery dawn rises out of the marshlands, pale blues and greys and muddied down greens, like daybreak in a virgin's watercolour. Staggered beeches here and there, sycamores, rowans, then a stand of queenly wind-blasted elms and the V's of wild geese breasting across the huge sky like arrows pointing out some immensity. Fantastic. I love his similes, but they're not overly done. There's just a few passages like that, descriptive passages, where we get those sort of lovely similes and metaphors. So you want to come up? You want to come up and say hello? She's sitting here now, looking at me. Yeah, there we go. And here she is. Did you finish your chew? Yeah? Happy now? Here is Tilly the Yorkie, yes. And she always appears in my videos. Yeah, there we go. All right. So, do you want to stay here for a while? Yeah, okay. The book, as you probably guessed, it is not told in linear fashion, because as I say, it actually starts with a letter from Bram Stoker to Ellen Terry towards the end of his life. And then we have this kind of train journey with him and Henry Irving. And then it goes back in time to his days as a theatre critic and also working as a clerk. He works at a clerk, I think, at the Customs House, but he loves the theatre. At a time, you know, when theatrical people were often sort of viewed with great suspicion and thought to be morally suspect. That he becomes a real huge fan of Henry Irving and goes to see his plays over and over again and writes to Henry Irving. And then Henry Irving invites him to be the manager of the Lyceum in London. And he decides that that is something that he really wants to do. And then we get the majority of the book is taken up with his experiences of being manager at the Lyceum Theatre, which is much harder work than he thought it would be, and his relationship with Irving and Terry. And as I say, it's not told in linear fashion, and it's told also in a variety of, as a kind of journal, letters, and also in kind of novel form. And the letter at the beginning to Ellen Terry suggests that these are a bundle of documents, papers that he has gathered and is sending to her. It's just such a brilliantly conceived and constructed novel. And despite the really stormy nature of Bram Stoker's friendship with Henry Irving, as I finished reading the novel, I was left with this real feeling of love and warmth between these three characters, which is really rather lovely. But of course, it's also poignantly sad because we know, and I'm not giving any spoilers here because it's pretty well known, that Bram Stoker's Dracula was never popular during his lifetime, and it became the incredibly famous book through, first of all, the films, is now thought of as one of the greatest novels ever written. And it's so sad, when you think that Bram Stoker thought of himself as a failed writer and didn't, and thought that he wasn't that much good a writer. It's incredibly poignant to see that. But what we do see as we go through Bram Stoker's, we see hints of ideas. He writes other books as well, but we get these little hints of ideas for Dracula as we go along, and it's kind of, you get that slow feeling of this story coming to life in his mind. But it's also the brilliant thing about this book is the historical backdrop. We're living in the time where Jack the Ripper was stalking the streets, and we see the fear of that rippling through all the people that Stoker knows at this time, because of course Jack the Ripper targeted women of the street, and of course actresses were often thought of as prostitutes, so there's a lot of fear around that time, and he talks about that really, really well. We also get glimpses of Oscar Wilde, Walt Whitman, who Bram Stoker met, and also, of course, the life of backstage in a theatre during the Victorian period. And to be honest, it's not that much different from being backstage when I was in the theatre, and sort of the, during my father's time in the theatre and my time in the theatre during the 70s and 80s. Apart from the technology being completely different, things haven't changed that much, I don't think, in terms of things like the kind of shabbiness of backstage area, the kind of chaos sometimes involved in putting together a show and bringing it to fruition. I love all the characters. Bram Stoker is portrayed as a kind of a very gentle man, but highly, highly intelligent and clever, but also sadly self-effacing, not really believing in his ability as a writer. Henry Irving is kind of highly likable in many ways, but extremely irritating, pompous, narcissistic actor. And the wonderful Ellen Terry, I love her portrayal as this woman very much out of her time, very much an independent and beautiful, slightly wild and highly intelligent woman. Now, of course, well, we know that Bram Stoker was the manager of the Lyceum Theatre, and of course then therefore knew Henry Irving and Ellen Terry. Of course, this is Joseph O'Connor's take on what happened and their relationships. We cannot know for sure, but I think it's a beautiful imagining of how things were between these three people. And as he says at the end, Shadowplay is based on real events, but is a work of fiction, and liberties have been taken with facts, characterizations, and chronologies. But it's just beautifully put together. Joseph O'Connor has researched Bram Stoker and the Lyceum Theatre extremely well in order to put this together. So even though we know, a lot of it is fiction, you are left with a general feeling of what those times were like, what those relationships may have been like, how it was to work in the theatre at that time, and the great warmth of that sort of relationship between these three characters. Such a lovely book to read. I do recommend it, particularly if you love Bram Stoker's Dracula, and if you are interested in theatre and its history, and particularly London theatre history, which is absolutely fascinating. I now give books I've read a star rating, 1 to 5, and I would definitely give this book a 5-star rating. I highly recommend it. Now, the next book I'll be reading, which I'll be reviewing in maybe 2 or 3 weeks' time, is something very different. It's called The Visible World by Mark Slaughter. I think that's the right pronunciation. Do let me know if I'm wrong. Which is about a man in New York who goes to Prague to find out about his parents' experiences during the war, the Second World War. So that should be really interesting. One of my mother's books. She always loved books set in wartime or about wartime, because of course she was living through that period herself. So this should be interesting, and I will look forward to reviewing this for you. I think my next video, I think, is going to be another A to Z of authors from my bookshelf. So the last one I did was Dickens. So what are we going to do this time? So that's, you got your cue now. So that's it from Tilly and me. Yeah. We will see you again next week. Have a great week, everyone, and we will see you again very soon. Oh, that's pretty. Yeah. All right. Bye for now.